Hey, Leon, thanks for your work here in week 10 and the rest of the term as well. It's been good work. You've done the whole course. So I'm glad to receive this response here in week 10 and thank you for your hard work all quarter long. I'm sorry we weren't able to figure out a time that would work for you, I guess, for a Zoom discussion. But like I said, good to study Matthew with you. And here in this forum in week 10, I think you've hit upon something that has far reaching implications, as you suggest, because the forgiveness of sins that Jesus's blood is for is not just a transaction, as you say, and nor is it dependent on people's meeting some minimal condition. Judas is in the midst of betraying Jesus, and yet, as you observe following Turner, Jesus offers his body and his blood to him and says it's for the forgiveness of sins. So that flies in the face, I think, of a lot of kind of standard Christian understandings of forgiveness. The most obvious is that God forgives only those people that meet some condition that God has set. And that just does not seem to be true here. And maybe more importantly, or at least as important in my mind, is that forgiveness, and Hauerwas brings this out in what you've quoted from him. Forgiveness in the Bible, including in Matthew, is about the bodily conditions of people's life on the earth. It's not simply a legal status of rightness before God, the way that Protestants have often uh, taught. It's not simply about some guarantee of a future state beyond the grave of the soul or something. Forgiveness is about healing that God does to people, their life together on the earth over generations, when their life manifests profound and painful debts, the consequences of sins that their ancestors and they themselves have committed and therefore sort of brought all kinds of harm and difficulty into their lives. That's what forgiveness is about, is relief of those consequences and therefore the healing that that relief implies. You can see this already anticipated way back in Matthew 9, if you remember, when Jesus says to the paralyzed man, when he sees the faith of his friends, that his sins are forgiven. And then when he's questioned about that, says that in order for people to know that the heir of humanity that he embodies has power on the earth to forgive sins, he tells the paralyzed man to pick up his bed and walk. And so it just drives home that forgiveness is not independent of the transformation of people's bodily lives and their relationships on the earth. It entails precisely that transformation. That's what the forgiveness is about. So here we have at the climax of the story about Jesus, the fullest expression of the forgiveness that he has come to embody and to convey to his people and beyond, starting with these disciples who, like, Judas is a betrayer. They too are inadequate. They're in the midst already of deserting Jesus. They're not even sure if they are the betrayer. And when Peter is sure that he's not the denier, Jesus tells him that in fact he will be 3 times this very night. So that forgiveness of his disciples affects their memory of Jesus, their relation to him, their relationships with each other, all that he has empowered them to do and to spread in the world. And it then reverberates beyond their lives to touch so many others, finally, all the peoples of the earth that Jesus sends them to disciple at the end of the story with what we'll study next week. The scandal of this maybe comes through poignantly in a scene a little bit later in this narrative in Matthew 27 when the crowd that is gathered before Pilate, when Pilate, I think, is kind of playing a game to try to come off himself as the better ruler or government in contrast to their authorities, uh, sort of taunts them a little bit with their plea for Jesus to be crucified, asking, what he has done to deserve that. Not that Pilate actually cares. And they say, his blood be upon us and upon our children. And of course, they mean a terrible curse upon themselves that will kind of continue to affect future generations. That's how committed they are to seeing Jesus executed publicly by Rome. And of course, this is a crowd that has been stirred up by the chief priests there before Pilate. But Matthew has prepared us to hear in their words something that they don't mean, that they don't know, that they can't anticipate, and that is that the blood that they have called down upon themselves and their children as a curse is actually a blood for their blessing, blood that will operate for their forgiveness, in how its effects in being shed on the cross will ripple out to touch their lives, their children's lives, and to deliver forgiveness that they don't even know to ask for. So that, I think, kind of intensifies the scandal of how this forgiveness comes to people when they don't deserve it, because God gives it to them as grace, as a gift, because they need it and God wants to give it. So I hope we can be agents of this kind of good news, the revelation of this sort of God who is with us in Jesus. It certainly isn't about turning a blind eye to people's sins or injustices. Jesus has hardly done that in his life. But it is the insistence that even when people are held responsible for their sins and endure the consequences of those evils and injustices in their lives and down through the generations, that is not finally for their destruction, but for their healing and for their life. And that, I think, is what we're called as Jesus's disciples to announce and to convey as agents of that forgiveness ourselves. So thanks for kind of hitting on such an important question here as we near the end of the course. Hope that you feel like you've learned a lot, and look forward to the last few days of the course here in the rest of week 10 and week 11. Thanks again.